The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times as Eliza Johnson wiped sweat from her brow. She had been scrubbing the marble floors of the Harrington mansion since dawn, her knees aching from hours spent on the hard surface. The spring sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting specks of dust that floated in the air despite her best efforts to banish them. Eliza stood up slowly, stretching her back. At 25, she shouldn't feel this tired, but raising her 16-year-old brother Anthony while working full-time left little room for rest. Their parents' car accident 3 years ago had changed everything, forcing her to drop out of community college and take the first steady job she could find. "Johnson, are those floors done yet?" Mr. Harrington's sharp voice echoed from his study. "Almost finished, sir," she called back, keeping her voice even and respectful despite the knot of frustration in her chest. Richard Harrington stepped into the hallway, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the section of floor she had already cleaned. He was a tall man with steel-gray hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to find fault with everything they saw. Old money ran through his veins like ice, making him believe the world existed to serve him. "There are smudges by the entryway." "Do it again," he said, not bothering to look at her as he checked his gold watch. "Yes, sir, right away." He paused, turning to face her with a smile that never reached his eyes. "The Crawfords are coming for dinner tonight. I expect everything to be perfect. You'll serve, of course." Eliza nodded, knowing what that meant. The Crawfords were the worst kind of guests, the type who spoke about her as if she weren't in the room, who left unnecessary messes just because they could. "And wear the proper uniform this time," Harrington added. "Mrs. Crawford mentioned your appearance was too casual last time." What he meant was that Mrs. Crawford thought Eliza's natural hair was unprofessional, though her locked hair was always neatly styled and pulled back according to house rules. "Of course, sir," Eliza replied, swallowing her pride for the 100th time that week. The job paid better than most in town, and Anthony needed new glasses and college application fees covered soon. After Harrington disappeared down the hallway, Eliza allowed herself 10 seconds, just 10, to close her eyes and breathe deeply. Then she returned to work, starting over on the entryway floors that had been perfectly clean already. The day dragged on. Between cleaning the dining room, polishing silver, and helping the cook prepare a meal she wouldn't get to eat, Eliza barely had time to send Anthony a quick text, making sure he'd gotten home from school safely. At 6:30, as the evening shadows stretched across the manicured lawn, Eliza slipped into the small staff bathroom to change into her sipping uniform, a stiff black dress with a white apron that made her feel like she'd stepped back in time. She smoothed her hair and pinched her cheeks for color, too tired to notice how the dark circles under her eyes had deepened over the past months. Just before 7, while arranging flowers in the grand foyer, Eliza's attention drifted to the sound coming from the music room. The Harringtons' youngest son was attempting to practice piano, hitting the wrong notes repeatedly with growing frustration. His teacher had left 15 minutes earlier, shaking her head in disappointment. When the house fell quiet, Eliza finished her work and glanced around. Finding herself alone, she slipped into the music room, drawn to the magnificent grand piano that stood by the bay windows. She didn't dare sit on the bench. She would be fired immediately if caught. But she let her fingers hover over the keys, imagining the feeling of playing them. What the Harringtons didn't know was that music had once been Eliza's dream. Before her parents died, she'd been taking music theory classes, learning from books borrowed from the public library. Even now, she studied whenever she could, memorizing notes from the sheet music left carelessly on the piano and practicing finger positions on her worn kitchen table at night after Anthony had gone to bed. The sound of a car on the gravel driveway startled her back to reality. The Crawfords had arrived. Eliza quickly straightened the music books and hurried to the door, preparing to welcome guests who would look through her as if she were made of glass. As she took her position by the entrance, she smoothed her expression into the blank mask she wore daily, hiding dreams that seemed as distant as the stars now appearing in the evening sky. Little did she know that the grand piano in the music room would soon become the stage for a moment that would change everything. The Harrington mansion was buzzing like a beehive. Eliza hadn't seen this much activity in the house since last Christmas. Everywhere she looked, people rushed about with purpose, Florists arranging exotic blooms in crystal vases, caterers setting up elegant food stations, and fellow house staff polishing every surface until it gleamed. Mr. Harrington's annual spring gala was just 2 days away, and it seemed like the whole town was talking about it. Eliza had worked through 3 of these events before, but this year felt different. There was an extra tension in the air, especially whenever Mr. Harrington entered a room. "Johnson, come here," Mr. Harrington called out as Eliza was dusting the antique bookshelf in the study. She set down her cloth and hurried over. "Yes, sir." "The guest list has grown to over 50 people," he said, not looking up from his leather-bound planner. "We've added the Wilsons and the Thumpsons. They've just moved into that new development by the lake. Have Lewis set up additional seating in the garden room?" "Right away, sir." Eliza turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "And Johnson? My wife mentioned the silver wasn't properly polished after the last dinner. See that it doesn't happen again." The accusation stung. Eliza had spent 3 hours on that silver herself, but she simply nodded and left the room, knowing better than to defend herself. In the kitchen, the head chef was barking orders at his team as they prepared test dishes for the gala. The air was thick with the smell of butter and truffle oil. "Please tell me he's not making more changes," sighed Lewis, the elderly butler who had been with the family for decades. His kind eyes were the reason Eliza had stayed at this job for so long. "Just more guests," Eliza replied, helping herself to a glass of water. "And apparently I don't know how to polish silver." Lewis shook his head. That man couldn't tell polished silver from aluminum foil. "Don't take it personally." Later that afternoon, Eliza was assigned to clean the ballroom. The space was massive, with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and tall windows that overlooked the gardens. At the far end stood the grand piano, a beautiful instrument that Mr. Harrington's wife had insisted on purchasing years ago, though no one in the family played with any real skill. As Eliza carefully dusted the piano's glossy surface, the door opened. Mr. Harrington walked in, followed by a thin man carrying a toolbox. "This is it," Mr. Harrington told the man. "I want it tuned perfectly. It'll be the centerpiece of tomorrow night's entertainment." Eliza kept her head down, continuing to dust as if she hadn't heard. But her ears perked up. In previous years, Mr. Harrington had hired professional musicians to play background music. Was he planning something different this time? The piano tuner opened the lid and began his work, filling the room with strange plinks and plunks as he adjusted each string. Eliza moved on to cleaning the windows, stealing glances at the process whenever she could. "Johnson," Mr. Harrington's sharp voice made her jump. "When you're done here, I need you to help Mrs. Blake with the place cards in the dining room." "Yes, sir," she replied, but he was already walking toward the door. Just before exiting, he paused, turning back to look at the piano with an odd smile that made Eliza's skin crawl. "Make sure this is spotless," he said, running his fingers over its surface. "I have special plans for it tomorrow night." Something in his tone made her stomach knot with dread. That evening, Eliza returned to her small apartment exhausted. The lights were still on, and she found Anthony at the kitchen table surrounded by textbooks. "You're up late," she said, setting down her bag and kissing the top of his head. "Chemistry test tomorrow," he replied, pushing his glasses up his nose. "How was work?" Eliza sighed, sinking into a chair. "Busy. The big gala is tomorrow night, so everyone's on edge." She didn't mention Mr. Harrington's cryptic comment about the piano. "Will you have to stay late again?" "Probably all night," she said, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension. "But they pay extra for these events, and we could use it for your application fees." Anthony looked up from his books, his young face suddenly serious. "You know I could get a job too. Lots of kids my age work after school." "We've talked about this," Eliza said gently. "Your job is to study and get into a good college. That's how you can help us both." After Anthony went to bed, Eliza sat alone at the kitchen table. She should sleep, tomorrow would be exhausting. But instead, she pulled out a music theory book she'd borrowed from the library. For half an hour, she practiced finger positions silently on the tabletop, imagining the notes in her head. As she finally drifted off to sleep that night, Mr. Harrington's words echoed in her mind. "I have special plans for it tomorrow night." Why did those words fill her with such unease? Little did she know that the piano would soon become the focus of the most humiliating and ultimately life-changing moment of her life. The night of the gala arrived, bringing with it a warm spring breeze that carried the scent of blooming roses through the open windows of the Harrington mansion. Eliza had been on her feet since 5 in the morning, helping with last-minute preparations. Her black uniform dress felt uncomfortably tight after a day of rushing around, but there was no time to rest. By 7 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. Expensive cars lined the circular driveway, disgorging men in tailored suits and women dripping with jewels. Eliza stood by the main entrance alongside Lewis, greeting guests with a polite nod before directing them toward the ballroom. "Smile, Johnson," Mr. Harrington muttered as he passed by, straightening his bow tie. "These people pay your salary." Eliza forced her tired face into what she hoped was a pleasant expression. She'd been up since dawn, yet he looked at her as if her fatigue was a personal insult to him. As the house filled with laughter and the clink of champagne glasses, Eliza moved through the crowd like a shadow, collecting empty glasses and offering trays of delicate hors d'oeuvres. Most guests looked right through her, while others barked orders without a please or thank you. A few of the kinder ones made eye contact and smiled, but they were the exception. "The mayor's glass is empty again," Mrs. Harrington whispered harshly as she brushed past Eliza. "See to it immediately, and make sure the shrimp platters are being circulated properly." Eliza nodded and hurried toward the bar, weaving between guests who seemed not to notice or care that they were blocking her path. As she passed the grand piano in the corner of the ballroom, she noticed it had been moved to a more central position than usual, its lid propped fully open as if prepared for a concert. The night wore on. Eliza's feet throbbed in her sensible black shoes, and her cheeks ached from maintaining her professional smile. Just as she was returning from the kitchen with a fresh tray of canapés, the sound of a spoon tapping against crystal rang through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Harrington called out, his voice cutting through the buzz of conversation. "If I could have your attention, please." The room gradually fell silent, all eyes turning toward their host. Mr. Harrington stood near the piano, champagne glass in hand, looking pleased with himself in a way that made Eliza's stomach tighten with apprehension. "I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our annual spring celebration," he continued, gesturing grandly. "As always, it's a privilege to have such distinguished company grace our humble home." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd at his false modesty. The Harrington mansion was anything but humble, and everyone knew it. "This year, I've arranged some special entertainment," Mr. Harrington said, his eyes scanning the room until they found Eliza standing against the wall, tray in hand. "Eliza, come here, please." A cold feeling washed over her. She carefully set down her tray on a nearby table and walked toward Mr. Harrington, conscious of every eye in the room following her movement. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure the guests could hear it. "Many of you know Eliza," Mr. Harrington said, placing a hand on her shoulder that felt heavy as lead. "She's been with our household for several years now." Eliza kept her eyes fixed on a spot on the floor, unable to look at the crowd of wealthy strangers now studying her like an exhibit. "What you might not know," Mr. Harrington continued, his voice taking on a theatrical quality, "is that our Eliza here has been quite interested in my piano." His grip on her shoulder tightened slightly. "I've noticed her eyeing it when she thinks no one is watching." A few chuckles rose from the crowd. Eliza felt her cheeks burning with humiliation. Yes, she had looked at the piano with longing, but always carefully, always when she thought she was alone. "So tonight," Mr. Harrington said, guiding her toward the piano bench, "I thought we might see if there's a hidden talent among the help. After all, shouldn't we encourage artistic pursuits in all levels of society?" More laughter, less restrained this time. Eliza found herself seated at the piano bench, the gleaming keys before her looking both familiar and terribly foreign under the glaring chandelier lights. She glanced up at Mr. Harrington, silently pleading, but his smile remained fixed as he leaned down to whisper in her ear. "Show them where you belong," he said softly, for her ears only. "And remember who signs your paychecks." He straightened up and addressed the crowd again. "Ladies and gentlemen, a special performance by Eliza Johnson." He stepped back, joining the semicircle of amused guests who watched expectantly, champagne glasses in hand, ready for the entertainment of watching a maid humiliate herself at their host's expensive piano. Eliza sat frozen on the piano bench, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. The polished black and white keys stretched before her like a road she dreamed of traveling, but never expected to journey down like this, not as a joke, not as someone's cruel entertainment. The room had gone quiet, the wealthy guests leaning forward with glasses in hand, waiting to laugh at her failure. She could feel Mr. Harrington standing just a few feet behind her, practically glowing with smoke satisfaction. In the corner of her eye, she caught sight of Louis, the elderly butler, his face lined with concern and anger on her behalf. But he was as powerless to help her as she was to escape this moment. Someone coughed. Another person whispered something that caused a ripple of snickering. The silence was stretching too long, making the humiliation even worse. "We're waiting, Eliza," Mr. Harrington said loudly. "Surely you can manage a simple tune. Chopsticks, perhaps?" More laughter bubbled up from the crowd. Eliza closed her eyes briefly. She thought of Anthony at home, studying late into the night, dreaming of college. She thought of their parents, her mother's gentle hands guiding hers over piano keys at their church when she was small. She thought of all the nights she'd spent practicing silently on their one kitchen table after Anthony had gone to bed. Eliza took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. The cool ivory felt both foreign and familiar. Her fingers found their positions naturally, and before she could think any further, she began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the room, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. The piece had been her mother's favorite, the sheet music among the few precious things Eliza had kept after her parents' passing. She'd memorized it note by note, playing it in her mind during long hours of scrubbing floors and polishing silver. As her fingers moved across the keys, the rest of the room faded away. There was no mocking crowd, no cruel employer, just the music flowing through her hands, telling her story in a way words never could. The sweet, melancholy melody spoke of loss and yearning, but also of hope and beauty found in unexpected places. Eliza's body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her back straightening as confidence flowed through her. The technical skill she'd developed through years of secret study emerged in full force. Her left hand provided a steady, pulsing foundation while her right hand drew out the melody with delicate precision. Even the challenging runs that had given her trouble in her imagination flowed smoothly beneath her fingers on the real instrument. She didn't dare look up, focusing instead on the keys and the music that was now pouring from her soul. But had she glanced at the crowd, she would have seen the transformation taking place. The smirks and anticipatory grins had fallen away, replaced by expressions of surprise, then wonder. Wine glasses were lowered. Conversations ceased entirely. Several guests had closed their eyes, letting the unexpected beauty of the music wash over them. Mr. Harrington's face had undergone the most dramatic change of all. The smug smile had vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief that gradually hardened into anger and embarrassment as he realized his plan had backfired spectacularly. As Eliza approached the final section of the piece, she allowed herself to play even more expressively, adding subtle variations that made the familiar composition uniquely her own. Her touch on the keys grew more confident, the dynamic contrasts more pronounced. She was no longer just playing notes on a page, she was speaking directly to the hearts of everyone in the room. When the final notes faded into silence, Eliza's hands came to rest in her lap again. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. The absence of music felt like a physical presence in the room, a held breath, a suspended moment between what had been and what was now possible. Then someone began to clap. A single pair of hands, soon joined by another and another, until the room erupted in applause, genuine and thunderous. Eliza finally raised her eyes, blinking in surprise at the standing ovation before her. Several guests were wiping away tears. Others were looking at her with expressions of admiration and respect that she'd never seen directed her way before. Only Mr. Harrington remained stone-faced and rigid, his complexion flushed with anger as he watched his guests shower his maid with the appreciation he'd expected for himself. His attempt to humiliate her had revealed instead a truth he'd never suspected. that true talent doesn't recognize the barriers of wealth or status, and that music, in the right hands, could transform a servant into an artist before everyone's eyes. For a moment, Eliza couldn't move from the piano bench. The applause washed over her like warm water, unfamiliar but wonderful. She'd never been the center of attention before, at least not in a good way. She finally rose on shaky legs, unsure what to do next. Should she bow? Return to serving drinks? The usual rules seemed to have vanished along with the final notes of Chopin's Nocturne. "Bravo!" called an older gentleman in the front, his eyes bright with genuine appreciation. "Absolutely magnificent." Others joined in with similar praise. A woman in a deep blue gown stepped forward, her silver hair elegantly styled. "My dear, where did you study? Your technique is remarkable." Before Eliza could answer, Mr. Harrington inserted himself between them, his smile tight and forced. "Quite a surprise, isn't it? Well, the night is young. Let's move on to dinner, shall we?" But the crowd wasn't ready to move on. They pressed forward, forming a circle around Eliza. Questions came from all directions. "How long have you been playing? Who was your teacher? Would you play something else for us?" Eliza's throat felt dry. I've never had formal lessons," she admitted. "My mother taught me the basics when I was little. After that, I just practiced whenever I could." "Whenever you could?" A man asked, looking confused. "You mean you don't have your own piano?" She shook her head, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "No, sir. I practice without a piano. I study music books and practice finger positions on tabletops." She left out the part about secretly studying the Harrington's sheet music during her cleaning duties. This confession seemed to stun the guests even more than her playing had. A woman gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. "You learned to play like that without regular access to an instrument. That's extraordinary." From the edge of the crowd, Louis caught Eliza's eye and gave her a small, proud nod. It meant more to her than all the praise from the strangers. Mr. Harrington clapped his hands loudly. "Yes, yes, very impressive. Now, dinner is getting cold, and the chef will be most displeased if we don't move to the dining room immediately." The crowd reluctantly began to disperse, but not before several guests pressed business cards into Eliza's hands. "Please call me," whispered the silver-haired woman, holding onto Eliza's hand for a moment longer than necessary. "I'm Eleanor Bennett. I teach at the conservatory, and we should talk about your future." As the guests filed toward the dining room, Mr. Harrington grabbed Eliza's arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "What was that?" he hissed, his face close to hers. "Making me look like a fool in my own home." Eliza met his gaze steadily. "You asked me to play, sir." "I only did as you requested." His face flushed darker. "Get back to work. Now, and give me those cards." She hesitated, then handed over the business cards, keeping Eleanor Bennett's hidden in her pocket. Something had shifted inside her, a small spark of courage that hadn't been there before. In the kitchen, the staff surrounded her immediately. "What happened out there?" asked Rosa, the cook's assistant. "Everyone's talking about it." "I heard the whole room stand up for you," said Peter, the youngest server. "Is it true?" Louis quieted them with a gentle gesture. "Give her space. She's had quite a night." He handed Eliza a glass of water. "We're proud of you," he said simply. Tears pricked Eliza's eyes. She blinked them away quickly and returned to work, picking up a tray of desserts. But as she moved through the dining room, she noticed a difference. Guests who had looked through her earlier now watched her with interest. Some smiled or nodded as she passed. One woman touched her arm gently and whispered, "That was beautiful." By the bar, Mr. Harrington stood with several men, their heads bent together in conversation. When he saw Eliza, he scowled, then deliberately turned his back. The change wasn't just in how others saw her. As Eliza moved through the crowded rooms, she felt different inside, as if a door had opened to a future she'd never dared imagine. Her fingers still tingled from the memory of the keys beneath them. Even if nothing else came from this night, she had proven something important to herself. And in her pocket, Eleanor Bennett's card felt like a small, secret key to possibilities unknown. The morning after the gala, Eliza woke up with sore muscles from hours of serving drinks and clearing plates. But for once, her tiredness came with a strange, light feeling in her chest. She touched her uniform pocket where Eleanor Bennet's card was safely tucked away. After making breakfast for Anthony and seeing him off to school, Eliza stared at the phone for nearly 20 minutes before working up the courage to dial the number on the card. Her hand shook slightly as she pressed the buttons. "Bennett Residence," answered a warm voice. "Hello, this is Eliza Johnson. Mrs. Bennett gave me her card last night at the Harrington Gala." Eliza's voice trailed off, suddenly unsure what to say next. "Eliza, I'm so glad you called," Eleanor replied, her voice brightening. "I was hoping to hear from you today. Are you free to meet this afternoon, say around 3? The request caught Eliza off guard. "I have work at the Harringtons until 6. "I see." There was a pause. "Well, I'd be happy to come to you. Would Mr. Harrington mind if I stopped by?" Eliza nearly laughed at the question. After last night, Mr. Harrington would definitely mind. But she needed this conversation more than she needed to stay in his good graces. "I'll make it work," Eliza promised. When Eleanor's sleek car pulled up to the Harrington mansion at precisely 3 o'clock, Eliza was nervously waiting by the front door. She'd spent extra time that morning pressing her uniform and fixing her hair, wanting to look professional. Mr. Harrington had left for his office downtown, but Mrs. Harrington was home. She raised an eyebrow when Eliza explained she had a visitor. "A personal visit during work hours?" Mrs. Harrington said coldly. "That's highly inappropriate." "It's Mrs. Bennett from the conservatory," Eliza explained. "She was at the gala last night." Mrs. Harrington's expression changed. Eleanor Bennett was well known in their social circles. "Very well, you may use the garden room, but keep it brief." Eliza led Eleanor to the small, glass-walled room that overlooked the rose garden. It was the least formal space in the huge house, with comfortable wicker furniture and lots of natural light. "Thank you for meeting me," Eleanor said, setting down her leather portfolio. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about your performance last night." Eliza's hands twisted in her lap. "It wasn't really a performance. Mr. Harrington was trying to embarrass me. And instead, he revealed an extraordinary talent." Eleanor leaned forward. "Eliza, I've been teaching piano for over 40 years. I've worked with students who've gone on to play at Carnegie Hall and with major symphonies around the world. I know talent when I hear it, and you have it in abundance." Heat rose to Eliza's cheeks. "Thank you, ma'am." "I'd like to offer you a scholarship to study at Bennett Music Academy," Eleanor said without preamble. "Full tuition." The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. "A scholarship? But I don't understand." "It's simple. You have a rare gift. Our academy exists to nurture such gifts." Eleanor's eyes were kind but serious. "Talent like yours shouldn't be hidden away or suppressed. It should be nurtured and shared with the world." Eliza's heart raced with a wild, impossible hope, but reality quickly tamped it down. "I can't accept. I have responsibilities. My brother's only 16. I'm what he has. And we need this job, the rent, his school fees." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "I thought you might say that. That's why I've prepared some options." She opened her portfolio and pulled out several papers. "We could arrange part-time study to start, with evening classes 3 days a week. We offer housing assistance for scholarship students, and there's a stipend program for those with exceptional talent, which you certainly qualify for." Eliza's hands trembled as she looked at the papers Eleanor was showing her. Each objection she raised, each practical obstacle, Eleanor had already considered and found a solution for. "Why would you do all this for me?" Eliza finally asked. "You don't even know me." Eleanor's expression softened. "When I was your age, someone did the same for me. I grew up poor in the country, with parents who couldn't afford a piano. A visiting music teacher heard me play at a church and changed my life." She reached across and briefly touched Eliza's hand. "Music belongs to everyone, not just the wealthy. And when someone with your level of talent appears, it's my responsibility to make sure that talent isn't wasted." Eliza looked out at the garden, her mind racing. Everything was happening so fast. Yesterday, she'd been just a maid with secret dreams. Today, those dreams were suddenly within reach. "I need to talk to my brother," she said finally. "This affects him too." "Of course." Eleanor stood, leaving the papers on the table. "Take these home. Review them with your brother. My phone number's there if you have questions." She paused at the door. "Eliza, I know this is overwhelming, but don't let fear steal this opportunity from you. You were meant for more than this." After Eleanor left, Eliza carefully folded the papers and slipped them into her pocket next to the business card. For the first time in years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. 6 months had passed since the night of the Harrington Gala. The autumn evening air was crisp as people filed into the Bennett Music Academy's concert hall. The space wasn't huge, but tonight it was packed, every seat filled, with some standing at the back. The fall showcase was a highlight of the season, featuring the Academy's most promising students. Backstage, Eliza paced in a small dressing room, her fingers moving through invisible piano exercises. She wore a deep purple dress that flowed around her when she moved, so different from the stiff black uniform she'd worn for years. Her brother Anthony stood nearby, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "You look great," he said, smiling at her reflection. "Stop worrying." "What if I mess up?" she whispered. "Everyone's out there." "You've been practicing for months," Anthony reminded her. "You know these pieces by heart." He was right. Eliza had thrown herself into her studies with a passion that impressed even Eleanor. 3 evenings a week had quickly become 5, and then full-time once Anthony's school year ended. They'd moved into the small apartment provided by the Academy's housing program, and Anthony had started his senior year at the nearby high school. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor peeked in, elegant as always in a simple black dress. "5 minutes, Eliza," she said, then added with a warm smile, "You're ready for this. Remember, just play like you do in practice, like no one's watching." But people were watching. In the audience sat several familiar faces from the Harrington Gala, wealthy patrons who had been so impressed by Eliza's impromptu performance that they donated to the Academy's scholarship fund. Lewis, the elderly butler, was there too, beaming with grandfatherly pride. He had retired last month but made a special trip to see Eliza play. Even more surprising was the envelope that had arrived 3 days ago. Inside was a formal invitation to tonight's showcase, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. Eliza had sent it after long consideration, not in spite, but as an acknowledgement that without that humiliating moment, she might never have found her way here. She hadn't expected a response, but this morning a small package had been delivered. A delicate gold bracelet with a tiny piano charm and a note that simply read, "For your debut, Mrs. Age." As the backstage manager signaled that it was time, Anthony gave his sister a quick hug. "Mom and Dad would be so proud," he whispered. Tears pricked Eliza's eyes, but she blinked them away. She couldn't afford to cry now, not before performing. She took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The bright lights momentarily blinded her, but as her eyes adjusted, she could make out faces in the front rows. Eleanor nodded encouragingly from the side. Eliza took her place at the gleaming grand piano, a far cry from the kitchen table where she'd practiced for so many years. She glanced at the program in the stand. Eliza Johnson, performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor and an original composition, New Beginnings. Her fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment. 6 months ago, she had been polishing this same piano for someone else. Now it was hers to command. She began to play. The Chopin was challenging, far more difficult than the nocturne she'd played at the gala. But months of proper training had strengthened her technique. Her hands moved with confidence, bringing the passionate piece to life. The music swelled and receded like ocean waves, telling a story of struggle and triumph that matched her own journey. When the final notes of the ballade faded, there was a moment of silence before thunderous applause filled the hall. Eliza smiled but didn't stand. Instead, she transitioned directly into her own composition. New Beginnings started softly, tentatively, like a question being asked. The melody was simple at first, then grew more complex as other musical voices joined in. There were echoes of church hymns her mother had taught her, jazz rhythms from the radio that played in their small kitchen, and classical structures she'd learned at the Academy. It was her life in music, past, present, and the future she now dared to imagine. As the piece reached its conclusion, Eliza felt a sense of peace wash over her. When the final chord resolved, she finally looked up at the audience. They were on their feet. Anthony was wiping tears from his eyes. Elena was applauding with unrestrained joy. Even the Harringtons, whom Eliza spotted near the back, were standing, Mrs. Harrington clapping genuinely while her husband looked on with an unreadable expression. Eliza rose from the bench and took a proper bow for the first time in her life. As she straightened, she felt the weight of the past fall away. The maid's uniform was gone. The girl who practiced silently on tabletops was gone. In their place stood a pianist, claiming her rightful place in the world.